Video 2, God's Existence. Hello and welcome to the channel. In today's video, the video is going to start out with 2 points. A fact is defined as a thing that is known or proved to be true. The 3 most significant parts of the definition are something that is known, something that is proved, and something that is true. Without any of the significant characteristics of what determine a fact, as requiring further explanation, the basis of all facts are known, proved, and true. Facts are consistent with reality, all of what is real or exists, by extent of a cause, and that reality is the inherent perception of what is real. The second point is that science, as defined in the last video, is a religion. This is a fact that can be proved, and that is true. Based on the definition in the last video of religion, stemming from the Latin extent religio, defined as deep contemplation or thoughts, in order to prove then that science is a religion, the definition of theory is provided. However, for procedural purposes in pointing out that science is a religion, the comparison is made between both definitions. Religion is defined as deep contemplation or thought. This is not a definition that is based on interpretation. A theory is defined as a supposition, a belief that is uncertain, based on a hypothesis, a proposition made as a basis for reasoning without any assumption of its truth, of a system, context-dependent definition, orderly or systematic in thought, intended to explain things. First and foremost, the definition itself is not based on evidence, as it is a belief, based on proposition. Considering a proposition is the result of opinion, based on thought to explain something, in the cause of science, origin. Science involves all 3 fundamental aspects of what define religion, contemplation or thought, as associated with origin. There is absolutely no difference between the definition of the word religion and theory. Therefore, all scientific dogma is religion that is tested according to a belief, not evidence, assuming a standard of proof and evidence of which there is none, and to the degree there is none, science is purely religion. The problem with science, stating that it is itself a religion, undermines science's intent to be empirical. If science stated itself as a religion, it would be immediately dismissed as a religion. Science has instead used a word that is the exact definition of religion to obscure itself as being empirical. Based on the definition of what constitutes a fact, science has been therefore proved a religion. Video 1 covered the overview of content in today's video, and starting with epistemology of the study and means for procedural induction. So, what is epistemology? Epistemology is the theory of knowledge. It involves 3 fundamental conclusions: the nature of knowledge, justification, and the rationality of belief. The philosophical analysis of the nature of knowledge and how it relates to such concepts as truth, belief, and justification are 2. Various problems of skepticism, the sources and scope of knowledge and justified belief, and the criteria for knowledge and justification. Epistemology fundamentally questions how what is known, and fails to answer what is fundamentally known. In philosophy, empiricism is a general theory of knowledge focusing on the role of experience, especially experience based on perceptual observations by the senses. The regress problem is the problem of providing a complete logical foundation for human knowledge. Science as a means for knowledge was the result of the theory of knowledge's failure to identify the cause of knowledge. The entire theory led to the confusion about how anything can be known. It is also the root cause of skepticism and the actual philosophy of science. There are 2 immediate problems, however: how anything can be known, or how it is a person is able to realize what is known. As to know implies that someone has the ability to know, to realize what is true, and that there is a fundamental cause for what people know. The argument of opinion and knowledge date back to a period when skepticism was at its highest, when philosophy and philosophers fundamentally questioned what is real, and that everything is simply belief because the difference between certainty and opinion are not clear. The problem never identified that intelligence is inherent, and a means to develop an understanding based on the inherent rationality of intelligence. The primary reason why skeptics are skeptical is because skeptics can define nothing as knowledge, because they have no framework to understand what qualifies knowledge or belief. The cause of epistemology was the difference that exists among people and the beliefs they have. It treated everyone as particularly equally rational, and not as people who could be confused, or the result of people who lack an understanding of what is perceptually real because of a skeptical line of reasoning. It never dealt with the fundamental problem of ignorance, denial, and personality, which is the fundamental reason it fails both as a theory and as a rational basis for knowledge. As mentioned in video 1, the theory can be used as a means, however, for procedural induction to disquantify two things: the irrationality of the argument of the theory of knowledge, and the entire reason the philosophy of science is fallacy, as the philosophy of science was actually based on bridging the gap between what is known or belief with the express intent to prove God's existence. Video 1 covered the topic in the overview, ontology, the study of being, and mentioned various rational conclusions based on logical induction and proof and evidence that disquantify alternative theories as alternatives themselves are logical, based on proof and evidence. Understanding the cause of various ontological disagreements requires the fundamental failures expressed in epistemology, or the cause of varying degrees of interpretation, as the root cause of skepticism. To divorce ontology from science, simply because the philosophy of science is born from the irrationality of the theory of knowledge, science is not a means for knowledge. The entire reason science is disregarded as a means for the study of ontology, and that God's existence is primarily known as God is the source of knowledge concerning his own existence, and that God is Jesus Christ. Ontology is a philosophical study of being. More broadly, it studies concepts that directly relate to being, in particular, becoming, existence, and reality. The main problem with this study is that it was convoluted due to the nature of skepticism of epistemology. Concepts that directly relate to being can arrive at no conclusion if the very nature of knowledge being questioned as it relates to being convolutes any understanding of what it means to be, or as it is related to concepts such as existence or reality. The concepts of becoming are as irrationally questioned because of epistemology. The nature of existence and reality cannot be defined by the very nature of skepticism. Ontology as a study, and all notions are disregarded in this study for the simple reason they are skeptical. The study of ontology covers ontological formations, ontology of fictional characters, ontological and epistemological certainty, body and environment, questioning the meaning of being, ontology and language, ontology, the human geography, reality and actuality, microcosmic ontology, ontological argument, and Hentika's locution for existence, which is a great fallacy. It should be noted that the entire intended philosophy of science and its origin, however, was intended as a means to prove God's existence. The study of ontology was also an attempt to prove God's existence. However, the philosophy of science has deviated from its initial intent and has become dogmatic, and is used as a means, however, to disprove God's existence, which it cannot, for the basis of proof and evidence that prove God's existence. This is not in line with the philosophy of science. To dispense earlier on, so that it does not hang over the lecture, the fallacies of the Big Bang Theory and Darwin's Tree of Life are articulated as false, not according to truth or fact, and are incorrect. These two theories must be dispensed with so that they are dismissed as fallacies associated with a failed epistemological consequence of treating knowledge as ambiguous. 1. The Big Bang fallacy. The problem with the Big Bang is the interpretation of evidence is treated as evidence. That is to say, the interpretation is evidence, not as what is observed, in mainstream science, if science should be referred to as science. The Big Bang theory is the result of the Hubble experiment, in which galaxies were observed, moving in space, at increasing distances from the Earth. The theory is further abstracted because of Einstein's theories. It was assumed that since galaxies were moving farther from the Earth, at increased distances from the Earth, that space itself was expanding. The first fundamental problem with the theory is 1. Space has no physical dimension. To assert that space, when lacking physical dimension, is an assessment of the density of space, is a literal contradiction and that space should instead be referred to as mass. To assert a mass is expanded and that something exists with inside of it is equally fallacious for a myriad of reasons. 2. Spaces lacking physical dimension cannot expand, as expansion is the result of an external influence on mass, a conflict with the entire false dichotomy of the Big Bang Theory. These two restrictions, based on simple logical induction, determine that space, which lacks physical dimension itself, cannot expand. However, objects moving within an infinitely large space that lacks physical dimension are not associated or determined to be associated with space, nor its expansion, but as caused by some type of gravitational force or gravitational influence within the objects or bodies moving themselves. In the particular case, galaxies. This is to say, objects cannot be associated with a lack of physical dimension of what is referred to as space. The simple observation that galaxies were moving, not that space was observed to be expanding, is the main problem with asserting that space is expanding. This is an example and the overall criteria for falsifying the theory, and moreover, the problem with the fallacy of scientific assertions, that interpretations are treated as evidence, and not that the observations are, or specifically dictate, what we understand as evidence. The theory is further evaluated as false because it assumes that space is expanding into everywhere. Something that lacks physical dimension cannot expand into something that lacks physical dimension. If such an absurd postulation is held, that an object itself expands, that has no physical mass or dimension, and something is asserted to exist inside of it, it should be noted that the nature of skepticism is most primarily responsible for this absurd assertion, as applied as a mechanic to attempt to postulate what is itself impossible. The exclusion of both possibilities outline the degree of absurdity and evaluate that Einstein simply stole or inferred on Newton's own equations, not that Einstein was a genius, and that Einstein's theories themselves are flawed, which should have always been obvious. This is not, however, to say that Newton was anyone to be held as an empirical source. The lack of logical induction is almost frightening. Thus, the Big Bang Theory is treated as it is, both false and fallacy, not even theoretically possible. To assert what is theoretically impossible as a theory is nonsense, and no further time is wasted on the Big Bang Theory. The fallacy of Darwin's tree. The argument of irreducible complexity, the phone is ringing. The argument of irreducible complexity is not generally understood. It is not a theory, not a theoretical interpretation. First and foremost, any system that lacks a cause of the function within the system, or a function within the system, cannot effectively cause or result in a process that is required for the system to operate. That is to say, if any degree of the function of a system is affected, such systems cannot operate and as a result cannot function. To assert a lesser system is capable of its own function, that those functions themselves are capable of producing systems that are more complex than the original system is fallacy. The unavailability of a system, or its parts, does not influence its ability to operate in a manner beyond what it is capable of. This is not an argument of sticks as means to dig up material compounds that can be used in forging. This is an argument that a system itself, physically reduced to its simplest part, does not function. Nevertheless, such is argued, without any logical or plausible explanation, is treated as fallacy and false. Science generally likes to assert what specifically does not have the ability or variables within the system to dictate any type of mechanical processes or processes themselves at all. Nevertheless, such fallacies are asserted. As such, in the case of Darwin's tree. It should be noted that Darwin's tree is fallacy for the obvious reason that 2a. Organisms cannot lack genes they inherit from a line of ancestry related as a cause for an organism, as 2b. A line of ancestry is preserved genetically. A lack of ancestry determines that descent has not preceded the ancestry that is observed, and the ancestry that is observed is the ancestry from which the organism has proceeded. The video is going to continue in the next video, video 3.